Welcome to our present state versus history on speaker. Here we are focused on the current events of our culture through the principles of our history, trying to make sense of the culture and the mindset of today. I am your host, Ray Mayfield. Well, okay, folks, here we are back on the pod. Well, I guess the last podcast that we recorded, sin versus the sin nature, I had made some mentions about this COVID mask and things like that. And wonderful YouTube decided I was giving out, what did they call it? They said medical misinformation. And it contradicted the World Health Organization. And then not only did they say this is a warning that I'm giving this false information out, but then they threatened me with locking me out of the deal. So that just spurred me to do a new podcast, and we're going to do a little social experiment of our own, because I want to talk to you a little bit today about the Reece Committees and this whole thing with the YouTube and their declaration and all that has put me onto this, because this falls right in line with what was found or determined, you might say, through all of this activity that went on and started in the early 1930s, and went all the way into the 1950s. Mr. Reece was a pretty well-known name in our political arena. And so we're going to deal with some of the things that were found in the deal. They were battling communism, I guess you could say. And there's some things that you could probably remember in your history about the Red Scare, they called it, and different things that went on there. We're going to deal with that. But first of all, let me say, this is not a medical show, and I'm not giving medical advice. And the whole thing that we were talking about in that last podcast really didn't have anything to do with that. If you listen to the podcast, you know that we were dealing with the sin nature and the freedom to choose and the ability to walk within the confinements of our own will. But for the sake of argument, I believe they've got their algorithms out there that are just looking for these certain things, and they're pulling these things out of there. And I know that most of the folks that are listening to this podcast have got, the halfway reasonable sense of intelligence within themselves and can think for themselves. So I'm not going to use certain words, okay, in anything that I say, because the thing about this United States of America, and it's the whole purpose for doing these podcasts, is that we work and live and breathe under a constitution we call the Constitution of the United States of America. Amen. It's not the Constitution of the world. It's a constitution for the citizens of one country, the United States. And because we live under that constitution, then that constitution, it protects us from any three-letter organization that might choose to violate our God-given rights. See, the rights that we experience or enjoy, you could say, that are protected under our Constitution are not given to us by the Constitution. They are just acknowledged by our Constitution because they are given to us by God Himself. And if we, as people under the Constitution, we decide that we want to have medical procedures done, or we don't want to have medical procedures done, then that's our right and our discretion in order to have those things done. And if we want to operate in certain activities and we want to wear certain attire, then we have the right to choose whether we're going to wear that thing or whether we're not going to wear this thing or whatever else we're going to do. And those rights are protected in the United States of America, not in the global world, which also means that any of these three-lettered institutions outside of our country in this United States, their authority is beneath the authority of the Constitution in this country. Now, if their authority in the other countries, if they want to allow that authority to be superseding the authority of the local government, then that's their prerogative. But here in the United States, we have declared that all organization and all law must fall under the guidelines of the U.S. Constitution. And in the Constitution, it says, I have the right of liberty and the pursuit of happiness as I see fit. And we're going to deal with some of that because this Mr. Reece, he believed that. You see, he had a definition of what he called republicanism. And his definition of that was that a government in which every citizen is free to order his own life as he sees fit. The worker may enjoy the fruits of his toil. He may provide security for his family, and there are no class distinctions and no distinctions of race or color. The citizen is a free man and not the ward of the state. Well, those aren't my words. That's the words of Mr. Reece, but I believe that's a pretty accurate definition, wouldn't you say, of what our republic is supposed to be. Because this is not a democracy, unlike all these folks want us to believe in the propaganda machine they have running out here, which we're going to deal with here today. It is a republic. And under this republic of which I stand, I'm thinking that's part of what? The Pledge of Allegiance that we learned in school. I'm not sure if they still teach that in school today or not, but they should be if they're not. But under which I stand, is where we live and we breathe. And last time I checked, if somebody lied to me, it wasn't the person listening to the conversation and eavesdropping over here's responsibility to make sure I knew they were lying. It was my responsibility to determine if what I've been told is the truth and whether I want to receive it, whether I want to think about it, or whether I don't want to think about it. But we've allowed these infringements on our rights that are protected under our Constitution, which one of them happens to be free speech. And that doesn't mean that we have the right to purposely go out and manipulate things. But at the same time, when we listen to somebody speaking and we take what they're saying in the contents and in the context of what it is being said, then we have the horse sense, my granddad used to call it, enough to know whether they're giving medical advice out or whether they just happen to mention something to do with a medical situation that might be going on. So, it isn't really important, the subject matter. The fact of the matter is, I have a right to determine whether I'm going to have a medical procedure or not, or whether I'm going to, again, wear certain attire or not. And I have the right to determine whether or not I am going to go certain places or not, or whether or not I'm going to work, eat, breathe, sleep. See, if I want to live outside in the cold and freeze my little self to death, then I guess I have the right to do that, don't I? If I want to work and make big money and save it all up and never spend any of it and live like I was broke and die that way, then I guess I have that right, don't I? So as an American, we're on this podcast and we're trying to bring an awareness to the reality of the situations of which we live. And I've mentioned this Reece Committee thing before, and I did a YouTube thing, believe it or not, and it's on the YouTube channel. Well, I think it is. They may be banning me from the whole, YouTube aspect after this. I don't know. They have a right to do whatever they want to do. It's their YouTube thing. And frankly, if it wasn't for just trying to get all this stuff going here, I haven't been on any of these social media deals at all until just recently because of this kind of stuff right here. Because my personal conviction is they all ought to be shut down. They don't have the right to do what they're doing. They have this platform they've put out there, and it's a public platform, and therefore people speak and they do things. And, if they want to go do some fact checking and say, well, these facts don't line up, then okay, fine. That's the information I need to have and do what I want. But don't threaten me and don't whatever else they want to do. You see, and we have all these things going on, which are such overreaches of not only the machine that's been created, but of our government itself, which are some of the things that Mr. Reece was so against and dealing with all through our history. If you go into reading some of these political archives, all the way from the mid to late 30s into the 1950s, when this man was really politically active, you find these things because he had some strong viewpoints that I don't necessarily agree with everything that he stood for with their situation in the communism things, but because of their staunch fear, I guess you could say, of communism, they did certain things or got involved in certain activities that some of it was not so good, and you know, I don't agree with it all. But as a result, when we look at what was learned, we can take away from these things because we have some things that are absolute facts. It's just like all the nonsense in the environment that we live in right now. There is so much propaganda, there is so much garbage going on out there that everybody's afraid to say anything at all because, oh, we might get judged by the independent fact checkers or whoever these people are that are running around out here. Or we might just absolutely, misspeak something or what have you. But the fact of the matter is, there are certain, should we say, alienable truths that drive people into thinking certain things and that come out of. Now, all of the gathering people up and saying they were communists and things that went on in 1940 and 8 and on to into the early 50s, some of those folks really were communists. Some of them weren't. Some of them was a government just being out of control, like it always is, overreaching its ability to do things and operating in a paranoia because we have people in the offices of politics who use these things as propaganda and political machines in order to go and do things that they want to do. And we understand that, and it's a reality that we have to deal with. But the fact of the matter is they uncovered some things that had been going on all the way back in the 30s that it's still going on today. And I realize that when you read those reports from 1948 and 1950 and those things in those hearings, at that given time when people were listening to these things that were being said, it was kind of like going, oh, really, that's kind of far-fetched. But the fact of the matter is today, we can look back and see that these things that they were talking about, that they were afraid of, are actually, we have evidence and see that not only were they going on then, but they are going on extremely well today. And they have fine-tuned these techniques to the point to where they use them. I mean, for Pete's sake, Walmart monitors your shopping habits into the point they may not go down into the specific individual, but they could if they wanted to. And they're looking at certain geographical areas and certain trends, and they're saying, okay, this little region over here between these 3 months of the year, they buy all kinds of coffee, so we got to push all kinds of coffee in over in that area in there. And then if they got a product they really want to move, you know what, they go into McDonald's, can go in and start shoving commercials into a certain area for their French fries or whatever, and then guess what happens in that certain area? The sales go up because they're manipulating people into doing what it is they want to do. And this political machine that's going on right now has learned how to master those things the same way. And now we've got all this media, social stuff, because what else you can do, not only the information they get is that beneficial, but what information they don't get also. And anybody that's paying attention to anything at all that's going on around this country, especially in the political arena, knows that these things are true. The things they want the public to be all in an uproar about, and they want them crisscrossing back and forth about and stirring stuff up, you're going to hear that propaganda constantly on the news, on the radio, wherever else it is. And anything that they really don't want to have to deal with, you're not going to hear nothing about it because they don't want anybody to be talking about it, and they want to keep it as quiet as possible. And just like this deal with this three-lettered organization that's putting out information, and if they want the masses to go in a certain direction to wear a certain attire, then guess what they're going to do? They're going to make sure the majority of the information that you hear is pointing in that direction they want you to go. Look at the TV commercials that you see, the propaganda on sexual orientation, the propaganda on lifestyle, the propaganda on where you want to live and who you're living with, and all of these medical procedure things that you see all going on, everything from A to Z. It's all there. We want to pick one certain thing and we want to be all protective of it because right now it's the hot button and we want to get all the political bandering that we can out of it. But the truth of the matter is, I have the right to choose whether I'm going